We live without religion. I draw upon ethics, naturalistic, on science and reason. Millions and millions of people live the same way without religion. In fact, in my view, the present age worldwide is a humanistic and a secular age, and the deepest trends of development of change are humanistic and secular.
A person can be moral without a belief in God. Goodness without God is good enough. Indeed, for many individuals, it is better. A person can be moral without a belief in God. One can even argue that religion is often an impediment to morality. I'm shocked that you are so anti-human. You're anti-human.
Welcome to Reasonable Faith, Conversations with William Lane Craig. I'm Kevin Harris, and we hope you'll find the topics we discuss enriching and enlightening concerning the big questions of life. Dr. William Lane Craig is a noted philosopher and theologian known for his work on the existence of God, philosophy of time, and the resurrection of Jesus. And we invite you to discover the wealth of resources at reasonablefaith.org. There you'll find Dr. Craig's famous debates with leading atheists, articles, books, podcasts, audio from Dr. Craig's Defenders class, and a question and answer section featuring amazing questions people send us and answers from Dr. Craig. That's reasonablefaith.org. reasonablefaith.org. Dr. Craig, when one thinks of secular humanism, one often thinks of Dr. Paul Kurtz, the so-called father of secular humanism. He's one of the original drafters of the Humanist Manifesto, and a while back you had a chance to debate Paul Kurtz on the topic, is goodness without God good enough? Now, this exchange has been published into a book by the same title, and by the way, is one of the resources available on our website, reasonablefaith.org. Kurtz really desires to make the case that secular humanism is the superior view, but give us some background on this debate, which has now become a book.
This was a result of an invitation to come to Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania to debate Kurtz. The year before, there had been a debate that some listeners may have seen between Alan Keyes and Alan Dershowitz. And it was a circus. If you've ever seen these two go at each other, they were interrupting each other and just behaving like nincompoops. It was wild, this Dershowitz-Alan Keyes debate. But the next year, they asked me and Paul Kurtz to come and participate in a public debate on the basis of ethics. And the title of the debate was going to be, Is Goodness Without God Good Enough? And Kurtz would argue that it is good enough, and I would argue that it's not. And so at the invitation of Michael Murray, who was a prominent philosopher at Franklin and Marshall, we had this debate, and the book then flowed out of the debate. Nathan King and Robert Garcia, a couple of young Christian philosophers, edited the transcript, secured some respondents of note, some prominent philosophers, and then gave Kurtz and me the chance to give a final afterword to our respondents, and this then was produced in the form of this book that was just released last year.
Was the material that you used in this debate your moral argument for God?
Basically it was, though I did try to put Kurtz on the defensive in the sense that I wanted him to show us that goodness without God is good enough. What I pointed out to the audience is that secular humanism doesn't win by default. Sometimes people think that if you refute the existence of God, say, as the foundation for moral values, then humanism just wins. It doesn't have to prove anything. And what I pointed out from Kurtz's own writings, by the way, is that Kurtz faces challenges both on the left and on the right. On the right, so to speak, are those who would base moral values in God. But on the left are moral nihilists, people who say that in the absence of God, there are no objective moral values and duties. Anything goes, we're just animals, and there are no objective moral values or duties in the world. And so Kurtz doesn't win just by default. He has to show not merely why the theist is wrong, he's got to show why the nihilist is wrong. And so that was the thing that I was constantly trying to rub Kurtz's nose in during this debate, was say, you got to do more than just refute me. There's a third party in this debate, namely the nihilist. And I want to see, why should we think that human beings are of intrinsic moral worth and have any moral duties if there is no God? Why isn't the nihilist right? And so that was the challenge that I wanted Kurtz to address.
Seems that nihilism would make a better default position if there is one.
Yeah, unless you can give some sort of justification for thinking that you've got the explanatory resources for moral value, you would seem to be without any explanation.
In other words, give us reasons why secular humanism would be the default and so on, or even the superior view rather than just nihilism.
Yes, exactly. And that was what I was trying to get Kurtz to do. And he never seemed to understand that. It was remarkable in the debate, Kevin. He would actually accuse me of being a really kind of depressing, awful person who thought that human beings have no moral value, no moral worth. He thought I was a dreadful sort of fellow. And I said, no, these aren't my views. I think that human beings do have value and worth because I'm a theist. What I don't understand is why on your worldview, your naturalistic worldview, human beings would have value and worth. It's your worldview that seems to me to have these dreadful consequences. And Kurtz never seemed to really grasp that fact.
It's like he's saying, Dr. Craig, don't you understand that there is something special about human beings and prominent and perhaps sacred or something like that? And you're like, well, yeah.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, Kevin, I would quote from his own writings where he would say, some people in this post-Darwinian world still try to invest human beings with some special significance as though they were important, but we now know that's not true. And I said, Dr. Kurtz, this is your own view. It's the humanist who still tries to invest the human beings with special significance, to think that they have moral worth and intrinsic value. What justification is there for that? And he never could fend off, I think, the moral nihilist on his left.
What a terrible position to be in, that secular humanists are going to have to embrace some kind of Darwinian naturalistic theory of humanity, and then at the same time try to deny what it leads to.
Right. I said it looks like speciesism to me.
Yeah.
Just an unjustified bias in favor of your own species.
There are several divine command theories, right? And so an argument that you use quite often is under the subheading. Is it under the category of a divine command theory?
Yes. Now, the argument itself doesn't require divine command theory. The argument's very simple. It just says, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties, however, do exist. Therefore, it follows that God exists. Now, that itself doesn't tell you the correct moral theory to adopt, but I would say a divine command theory of some sort is the most plausible way to relate God to moral values and duties.
The book also has some respondents. Any highlights from some of the respondents?
Yes, I have to say that some of the respondents, particularly Walter Sinnott Armstrong, who is a professional ethicist, a philosopher at Dartmouth College, and Louise Anthony, who is at University of Massachusetts, their responses seem to fundamentally misunderstand the argument. I was surprised that professional philosophers could make these sorts of mistakes. What they would show over and over again was that in order to live an ethical life, you don't need to believe in God, that you can have moral values and live a good life without being a theist. And I pointed out to them, my argument is not that in order to live a good moral life, you have to believe in God. It's not saying the belief in God is necessary for morality. I'm saying that God is necessary for morality. You need to have a foundation for the objectivity and the moral values you follow. So they confuse epistemology with reality.
You've said that till you're blue in the face. I know. You debated Walter Sinnott Armstrong. You debated Louise Anthony. You said it. You said the disclaimer. Many atheists have been very grateful to you for pointing this out, because many people of faith or Christian people think that if you're an atheist, you're automatically immoral and so on.
Yeah, an evil person.
We've done disclaimer after disclaimer after disclaimer on this. But yet Paul Kurtz and Louise Anthony seem to be kind of accusing you of the same thing here. She said, Bill, I'm surprised you have any friends.
Yes.
and Kurtz is saying, well, Bill, don't you see that there is something good about humans? Don't you want to do good for humans?
Kurtz was amazing in this debate in that sense, given he never got the argument. Over and over again, he would insist that you don't need to have a belief in God in order to be a good person and to have meaning and joy in your life and things of that sort. And I'd get up and say, Dr. Kurtz, I'm not denying that an atheist can have a joyful, meaningful existence. What I'm saying is that God must exist in order for there to be objective moral values and duties. You need him as a foundation. Whether you believe in him or not is irrelevant. And he never got the point, Kevin. The obtuseness was remarkable.
Well, people can read the book.
Yes.
Is Goodness Without God Good Enough? And it's available on the website, reasonablefaith.org. I read an article this morning that there's a humanist organization that wants to spread more humanist congregations around the country to accommodate for people who are atheists or agnostics or various non-believers, for them to come together and have community and have music and have togetherness and fellowship and all the things. Paul Kurtz responded to that saying that he really doesn't like that approach because he doesn't want any religious language or religious similarity involved in any of these so-called secular humanist congregations.
That's interesting.
The reason, probably, my suspicion why Dr. Kurtz said this is because it brings up the fact, Geisler has pointed it out to him, others have pointed it out, it points to man's need for God, man's need for transcendence, man's need for fellowship and togetherness and all of these things that secular humanist congregations complain they don't have, but try to replicate.
Yes.
And so he's saying, you don't need any of that. Just get together and eat chicken. Well, that sounds like a bunch of Baptists. I don't know what to do.
Well, I was thinking sort of like the Unitarian Universalist Church in a way. That's sort of the kind of community that they try to foster as well. But that is a very good point. I think there is in the human psyche a yearning for transcendence and for something more. And I'm not surprised that some humanists would feel that a deficit of their worldview and try to have a kind of religious humanism, though I wasn't aware that Kurtz was opposed to that. That's extremely interesting.
The article also said that after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evolution, we finally are at a point where we are moral beings. And so that seems to be a Darwinian argument for morality. Is that what the secular humanist has?
Well, that is sort of Kurtz's view. Kurtz says that he believes in objective morality. And I think he's right in saying that what he believes in is objective, but I don't think it's morality. What he thinks is that as a result of the evolutionary process, there has been instilled into the human species a kind of ingrained herd morality that functions well in the perpetuation of our species and that enables us to live in community, and that there are certain objective truths about the way community is fostered. So that, for example, to live in community, you need to have mutual respect and to treat one another as ends rather than means. You should not steal and murder, things of this sort. There are what Kurtz calls common moral decencies that are requisite for any group of human beings living in community. And I think there probably are such objective truths as that sort, but that's not morality. All that is a description of the sociological conditions that are requisite for beings to live in community and in harmony. And you could have similar rules for baboon society, or even, frankly, for ant society, for living in an ant heap in a socially cohesive way. You have to have the worker ants and the other feeders and things of this sort, the aphids that are enslaved in that society. So that isn't morality. That's all conditional. For the sociopath who says, I don't care about human community, I don't want to be part of this society, he does nothing wrong for flouting these conventions and refusing to be a part of it. Moreover, you can have societies that have quite different rules, like, say, apartheid South Africa or National Socialist Germany, where some people aren't included in the society. They're excluded because they're different. And you can't say that what they do is really morally wrong. They've just adopted a different set of rules. So I don't think that that is morality in any way. If that's what morality reduces to, then I think the nihilist is right. These are just social mores, but they're not really ethical in the sense of having a moral value or any kind of moral obligation or prohibition to them.
I'll tell you, Bill, I'm bummed when the weekend's over, and I try to distract myself from it and enjoy my Saturday. If I really thought that life was going to be over, I'd do everything I could to distract myself from my impending doom. And that's a nihilistic view. It's all going to be over.
It's hard, I think.
The weekend is going to be over, and so is your life.
Yeah. That's right, and that ultimately it won't make any difference what you did. That the universe is going to end the same way. It will ultimately die, thermodynamic heat death, will become cold, dilute, absolutely dark, and lifeless. And all of these decisions and things that we worried about along the way ultimately make no difference whatsoever. It all ends the same. It's really a very demoralizing worldview, I think.
Are we using the argument from outrage, though, that you're saying, well, that's just outrageous, it just can't be?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, there is that outrage in a sense, but I think the second premise of the argument, that there are objective moral values and duties, is based upon our moral experience. What we're claiming is that in moral experience, we sense a realm of objective moral values and moral duties, and that we have no good reason to think that our moral perceptions are delusory, any more than our sensory apprehensions of an external physical world are delusory. We trust our sensory perceptions of the physical world. Why shouldn't we trust our moral perceptions of the moral realm? In the absence of a defeater, we're perfectly rational to do so. And in fact, some of these atheists, like, say, Louise Antony, who is a moral objectivist, unlike Kurtz, she will say, I think quite rightly, that I am more confident of my moral perceptions.
Wait a minute, now is Kurtz a moral objectivist?
Well, he claims to be, but as I say, I think while what he believes in is objective, it's not morality.
Okay, so Louise Antony.
But Louise Antony is a moral realist. She thinks that there really are objective moral values and duties, and she says that I am more confident in my perception of objective moral values and duties than I am in the premises for any argument for nihilism. And I think that that's quite right, that any argument to show that these are illusory, that we don't have them, will be less certain than your moral perceptions themselves. And so it's not just an argument from outrage, it's an argument from moral experience that there are objective moral values and duties. But then the question will be, what worldview best grounds this realm of objective moral values and duties? And apart from theism, I can't think of any good grounding for these objective realities that we apprehend.
Well, Bill, you seem to have to point out a lot in these exchanges that this is a meta-ethical consideration. In other words, it seems that people start getting into ethics, applied ethics, how we apply morality, but that this is ultimately a meta-ethical consideration.
That's right. I think the greatest confusion, Kevin, would be between what I call moral ontology and moral epistemology. These are constantly run together by critics. Moral ontology concerns the reality and the basis in reality for moral values and duties. Moral epistemology concerns how we come to know that there are objective moral values and duties and what they are. And those are quite distinct issues. And I'm not saying that to know there are objective moral values and duties, or to know what they are, you need to believe in God. I'm open to all sorts of epistemological theories about how we come to know our moral values and duties, or that they exist. I'm talking about moral ontology. What is the basis for moral values and duties?
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us on Reasonable Faith with William Lane Craig. This podcast is available at reasonablefaith.org, as well as a wealth of audio, video, and written materials from Dr. William Lane Craig, an interactive forum and a question and answer section that is really popular. People all over the world have benefited from the insights of Dr. Craig, and we invite you to browse our resources at reasonablefaith.org. If you appreciate these topics and this ministry, please consider being a part of us with your financial gifts. For more information, go to reasonablefaith.org. I'm Kevin Harris. Join us again for Reasonable Faith with Dr. William Lane Craig.